Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started as more people are trickling in. Welcome everybody to this month's AOS Student Affairs Committee webinar. We're really grateful to have 4 amazing panelists today and really grateful to all of you for tuning in. My name is Mayna Handmaker. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Environmental Conservation Department. And we just want our other committee members to introduce themselves really quickly.
Hi, I'm Lynn Brown. I'm a PhD student at Trent University.
And hi, my name is Kristen Rosamond, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Natasza Fontaine. I am a shorebird seabird biologist with Audubon Florida.
Oh, thank you so much, Natasza. Yeah, we're going to move into the panelist intros in just a second.
Okay.
We just wanted the committee members to introduce. Just want to welcome everyone, kind of get everyone.
I'm jumping ahead.
Clearly, we're all very excited to be here. So just a few quick housekeeping notes. Lynn is going to be moderating the chat, so feel free to drop any questions there. We're going to open up for live questions after we kind of move through a facilitated discussion of some of the questions that you all pre-submitted during registration for this event. And first, we're going to start by just welcoming our panelists, and we're going to hear kind of a 5 or so minute intro from each of our panelists about what brought them to this work and their perspectives on safe and inclusive fieldwork and what their current roles are. And then we're going to have a short presentation by Dayna, and then we will move into the Q&A. So thank you everyone so much for being here. And I think we'll just go ahead and introduce panelists in the order that they are on this slide. And I'm going to stop sharing this welcome slide so that we can see each of our panelists on the full screen. So let's see. Okay, wonderful. So Dayna, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see everyone here. My name is Dayna De La Cruz. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the Young Voices of Science and Community Relations Specialist at the Hubbard Brook Research Foundation, but I'm here to talk more about my CRS position at my job, so we'll go into that in a bit. But I'm a proud Mexican-American queer first-generation college graduate, and I've had several field experiences across different sites. I've had my very first field research experience back in 2018 at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, followed by my summer at Harvard Forest through their RU program in 2019. Then in 2020, I spent a few months in the Peruvian Amazon through the School for Field Studies. After that, I graduated from Wellesley College in 2021 with a degree in biological sciences and Portuguese global studies, and did a summer research assistantship across different sites, with the UNM Sevieta Station being our home base, but we were traveling across New Mexico, Arizona. That same year, I became a field operations associate at a biotech company called BFlow, where I conducted agricultural field work in Mexico, Peru, and in the US. And then coming full circle, I then took this role in 2023. So across my career, I've had both great and not so great experiences that have shaped the type of work that I'm doing now, but it's good to be here.
Thank you so much, Dayna. Jerika, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Well, thank you to you both. My name is Jerika Loren Heinze. I'm very happy to be here, very happy about these conversations that we're going to have in this topic, because conversations like this have been historically absent in knowledge production. So glad that this space exists. I am the founder of Fieldwork Initiative, which is a presence for safety, well-being, and trauma intervention for folks who face trauma when they do fieldwork. I'm also a research specialist at the National Sexual Assault Research Center. And in sort of both capacities, working with vulnerable groups and ending sexual violence, bringing to light our stories and doing those things. One of the biggest sort of pieces of that, I suppose, and the biggest piece I want to share with everyone today, and we'll talk about, is our pre-fieldwork training, which is a space where we just talk about issues that might happen in fieldwork that I've lived. I know many folks have. I've been interviewing survivors of fieldwork trauma for the past 3 years. Plus, I've been saying 3 years, I think for 5 years now, so for a while. And so very happy to make, that's recently been an installment at Oxford University, and seeing those type of things happen where we're having these conversations about fieldwork, what's possible, what happens if it all goes wrong, what happens if something unexpected, all those types of things. And so that's sort of my capacity here today. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to speaking about it in more depth within the hour.
Thank you so much. Natasza, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Natasza Fontaine. I am currently a shorebird seabird biologist working in the Eastern Panhandle in Florida. I completed my graduate degree from Florida State University in 2021. And since then, I've done quite a few different field positions in the Southeast, but also in South America and New Mexico. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I've had quite a bit of different experiences, some good and some not so great. So yeah, it's just great to be here to learn from everyone and be able to share and to keep moving forward with this.
Thank you so much. And Viviana, you are our last panelist to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Viviana Ruiz. I'm really excited to be here today. I recently stepped down as co-chair of the AOS D&I committee, which I helped found way too long ago, before COVID, and that always seems like a decade ago. And I have been getting involved in other things since stepping down. And one of the things that I became recently involved in, I'm a board member for Field Inclusive. It's a new NGO that launched in August of 2022, to make sure I got that date right. And it's an NGO that really works hard to provide tangible and actual solutions to field safety issues, and moving away not just social field safety issues, not just traditional physical field safety. And a lot of my role is they have kind of 3 strategic pathways that they work in, identifying and addressing field safety issues, developing field safety resources, but also supporting marginalized researchers through financial aid and different experiential experiences, learning opportunities. And that's kind of what I'm most involved in. My official role, I'm a co-director of the Center for Avian Population Studies, and I also lead our conservation science program at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. But I've been a field researcher my whole life. I got my tropical biology degree in Costa Rica, done a lot of field work in different places. Also, I work with a lot of international students, especially when they come and visit here in Ithaca. They have to drive through a lot of Confederate flags. And they're always like, where are you working these days? And so this is something that has been in my mind, being a female researcher in Latin America doing remote field work, when people would ask me where my husband was, where my kids were, and I was, I think, 18. I was like, I don't have either one. But so it's something that's been on my mind. So I'm really happy to be here and happy to be representing and supporting Field Inclusive.
Thank you so much to all 4 of you. We are so grateful to have your perspectives and wisdom to share with us today, and also really excited to have so many different perspectives from different types of fieldwork, even both in and outside of ornithology. So just on behalf of all of us AOS students, we're just really grateful to get to learn together today. And like you all said, kind of keep pushing, moving the needle forward on how important it is to make fieldwork safety and inclusivity like front of mind for all of us as we're planning our field seasons and figuring out how to navigate complicated situations. So what we're going to do next is Dayna is graciously going to share a short presentation with us about their work at Hubbard Brook, and then we'll use that to transition into the Q&A to get to hear from all of our panelists. So Dayna, if you want to share your screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and let me share the correct screen. Let's see. Great. Can everyone see that?
Looks beautiful.
Awesome. Oh, yay. Thank you. Canva is a lifesaver. Alrighty. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I know I did a short intro in a bit, but this is basically what I said a few minutes ago. I've had several field experiences across the US at different LTER sites, but I've also had field experiences outside of the US, across Latin America. And these are just some clips of me in different sites and just in some different adventures. So I thought I could share that at the beginning. But yeah, so let's go ahead and go into what Hubbard Brook is. So Hubbard Brook is a multidisciplinary community of scientists, students, technicians, educators, artists, and environmental leaders. We combine long-term monitoring and ecological experiments to build knowledge about the Northern Hubbard Forest. Within Hubbard Brook, we have the Hubbard Brook Ecosystem Study, HBES, which is a long-term collaborative research program that takes place in the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, so HBEF, a lot of acronyms, which is a 7,800 acre field site on unceded Abenaki land in the southwestern part of the White Mountains National Forest in New Hampshire, managed by the USDA Forest Service. So the Hubbard Brook Long-Term Ecological Research Project has been funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, LTER program since 1988, and this project funds much of the long-term monitoring at the site in collaboration with the Forest Service and various grants. So this is a helpful infographic because there's a lot of sections and it's complicated. But right now, today, I'm going to talk about more of my CRS work. The other part that I do is more with young voices, and that's specifically under HBRF. So a lot of good stuff. So on paper, the CR specialist works with the Hubbard Brook Research Foundation, the Hubbard Brook DEI Committee, and the Hubbard Brook students and scientists to create a vibrant, inclusive, and creative workplace culture in which all participants have a voice and are empowered to affect positive change. So this includes, but is not limited to, organizing, orientation, social events, activities for the research community during the summer field season, as well as initiating, developing, and contributing to new and ongoing DEI projects, such as community surveys, DEI training, etc. I'm also part of the LTER DEIA committee, and this allows me to be more in the loop of what is happening across the network and potentially bring more resources to Hubbard Brook and partnerships. So this position itself has basically been a cycle of receiving feedback, implementing this feedback, and then analyzing the responses to these changes. There was one CRS person before me, and so they did a lot of awesome surveys. I then used those responses to implement into the year that I've been here. And so I'm sort of increasing that pool of feedback to make sure that our residents and our scientists are having a great experience at Hubbard Brook. So these are some of the things we have done in order to make our site a safer and more inclusive environment. You see that it's broken down into 4 categories. This is only just a bit of the things we've done, but there's preparation, which is sort of what is happening before the field season as the preventative measures of any sort of friction or conflict. Then we have the trainings, which is happening before and during the summer, and our resources provided either by Hubbard Brook or by the LTER. We have the site dynamics area, which is what is happening during the field season. And then lastly, communicating, which is now how we share the efforts that are happening in the community, because it's very important for us to highlight and not just do the work and then not talk about it. So I'm specifically going to share a bit more of a few of these. So starting off with the housing survey, this is an optional pre-housing survey for residents to fill out before the season to help Hubbard Brook improve their housing arrangements and provide a safe and inclusive housing experience for everyone. So it asks questions pertaining to gender identity, preferred gender identity of roommates, compatibility questions that are related to cleanliness, sleeping schedule, noise level, preference, free time interests, friendship expectations, etc. So this is something more field adjacent, which is a lot of the work that I do, but we believe it is very important to create this type of living environment on site where a lot of the field work is happening and where a lot of the field work could be impacted based on living conditions. On a similar note, this summer, we have officially began this position called the resident advisor on site. So resident advisors are students who will serve as unit leaders. So a unit is basically the living quarters. And they will be in charge of organizing meal plans, house cleaning, and discussing group dynamics. So these advisors will host weekly house meetings to offer some guidance in topics such as communal living and to reassure that residents are having a good experience and are feeling comfortable with their current living situation. And I'll also be present throughout all of this, so I'm more of a resource to the students as well as the resident advisors. I'm also currently in the process of looking for external mediation services in case there is any sort of friction. We have this conflict resolution resource provided by a group of experts who specializes in this area that we can contact outside of. of Hubbard Brook. So moving on to workshops, one of the workshops we provided this last summer included the Youth Advocacy and Environmental Action Panel, which was an interactive conversation between our panelists and audience on building community through action. So we hit on really important topics such as the importance of youth presence in movements, intersectionality that environmental movements hold, how to support the youth, so proper pay, proper benefits, how to not support the youth, so performative tokenization of youth, ageism, etc., a reality of ecological grief and anxiety, and the best ways to cope with these emotions, as well as anti-burnout mechanisms. So this was a combination of 3 people who have been involved in Hubbard Brook in different ways. Some of them had been involved through other events that are more on the other sections of Hubbard Brook. Some have been more through the Young Voices of Science, which is what I work through, but we selected people and brought them together, similar to this panel, to talk about some really important things such as these listed here. We also partner with Field Futures, which is an organization that provides trainings that guide participants to prevent, intervene in, and effectively report incidents of sexual harassment and assault in field settings. So participants learned and practiced tangible prevention skills via organizational climate settings. The LTER is currently providing these trainings right now, along with a mentorship training called Entering Mentoring, which is an evidence-based approach to building mentoring skills, specifically tailored to STEM researchers. So the LTER network is piloting a free in-network version of workshop series. So we have been vigorously broadcasting these across our community so that they could take advantage of these resources. I took specifically Field Futures training last summer through the LTER, and I enjoyed it so much, and I thought it was such important content that we then partnered with them separately, brought them to our site. And so now that we have sort of this in-network LTER service, we're making sure to continue providing that resource. And lastly, it's really important to highlight all of the work. So I also write about all of these efforts in our Hubbard Brook Monthly, where I pick different topics each month to share with the Hubbard Brook community. So here are just a list of some of the past topics. And so this includes a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. So Field Futures, the Youth Advocacy event. We have a lot of social events that I really didn't get into, but that helps with community and team building within the groups. And then we have a lot of surveys. We have a lot of exit surveys so that we give the residents an opportunity to provide us feedback. We have different checklists that are optional, and we provide as a tool for communication, both in the realm of hiring and then in the realm of guidelines and expectations within like living quarters or just field groups in general. Talking a lot about the DIA committee. We're always motivating people to join the committee. So we have a wide range of voices. We recently have been having a lot more younger voices present and have a lot of graduate students that have been attending, and that's what we want. We want a good combination of voices, and have been having a lot of good conversations recently about Hubbard Brook's role in summer site dynamics. So how much should we be involved when it comes to specific conflicts that may be happening and what we can do about it. Overall, it's not enough to simply focus on science and research. Field season comes with many more components, and that is very intersectional, and we all know this. So having a better sense of community improves experience and overall quality of work. Some people experience higher safety risks due to prejudice and bias against individuals. And like AOS mentioned, we all deserve to feel safe in the field, and we can play a proactive role in continuing this learning journey. So I'm continuing to educate myself to continue bringing these resources and new practices into our Hubbard Brook community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dayna. I think that that really sets the tone for transitioning, just because, you know, to hear what Hubbard Brook has been able to do is like a very long time established you know, research site and research program. Like a lot of us are coming from different perspectives, where maybe it's one graduate student mentoring a small team of field technicians. Maybe it's more in a university setting. So I think just seeing the structure of what you all have been able to implement is really helpful. And if anyone in the audience is working with more of a long-term research station and wants to follow up and ask questions specifically about Hubbard Brook, please feel free in the live Q&A. And then just to kind of complement what Dayna shared, I'm just going to pick from some of the questions that you all pre-submitted and kind of get us going in a discussion, and then we'll open it up for live questions. And since we you know got to hear a lot from Dayna about how this has worked in a a really long-term research station type setting, or with a lot of support, it seems, on a structural level, maybe to get some other panelists' perspectives. We had a couple questions submitted about strategies for convincing university administrators or whoever the leaders are of the context in which you're doing fieldwork to try to incorporate some of these best practices and actually develop a protocol for inclusive field safety, either department-wide or lab-wide or research group-wide. So can any of our other panelists speak to, from smaller group context, or if you're not in such a well-established setting, can speak to strategies that, like, as students, researchers, we can kind of try to lead the way to bring some of those structured approaches into our work. Jerika, go ahead and take the first go.
Yeah, that is such a great question, because essentially what we're looking to is changing the culture. We've all inherited a very toxic culture of academia that doesn't serve us, and there's a lot of pressure to reproduce that for others and in general keep it going. And so creating that new culture, I think, is having, as I kind of echoed at the beginning, sort of not to harp on it, but having conversations before people go into field, trainings. What we found is that the vast majority of people, and this is echoed through the SAFE study with Dr. Kate Clancy and many others, that we know that the majority of folks, when they go out into the field, have had something traumatic has happened. Maybe that was an assault, maybe that was a bullying, maybe that was a personal mental health, maybe that was a stress that they were enduring, maybe they were in the field and somebody was sick at home and they still had to continue, or there's so many plural ways it can look. But what we know is that the majority of people have these experiences. We also know that the majority of folks have never had a conversation about safety, in the sense like, hey, it's totally okay if you don't feel safe to come home, or it's totally okay that you do, that this might happen. Hey, sometimes we go into the field, nobody, we don't get any of our data, and that's okay too. That's a useful research on the barriers to getting research. Having these types of really honest conversations, because fieldwork is notably hands-off in its pedagogy, in its approach, especially for like first-year students, having conversations ahead of time before students go into the field, talking about all of these things and making it a normalized conversation, and having it not just something offered once a year, but like embedded into the pedagogy, embedded into the curriculum, where we think, when we talk about, things ahead of time, I think is the most important thing, because we also know, in coupling with that, we know that when people have things that go wrong, the vast majority never say anything about it, because we have this idea that we have to keep, a sort of put our best foot forward, especially when there's grants and research and other people. It's very taxing for people's wellness and their own well-being. So yeah, I think, just to answer it in a shorter nutshell, I think that embedding this as permanent fixtures in the teaching approaches, where we talk about these issues and don't just wait for them to happen after the fact, and sort of the burden becomes on the victim or the person who is implicated to have to bring it forward, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that can kind of segue us into a conversation of how we integrate and normalize conversation about field safety and inclusivity before there's a problem. So we're lucky on the panel to have representation from, your organization, Jerika, Fieldwork Initiative, and then Viviana representing Field Inclusive, and Dayna shared a lot of concrete resources that Hubbard Brook has turned to or helped facilitate. So does anyone want to speak to how, like, what resources for training that might be outside of our institutions or research groups we could try to, as students, tap into to then like begin that conversation on a team level or institutional level where we're working, like where we could go seek out that training to then bring it back with a really, a suggested structured approach. Yeah, Dayna.
No, yeah, this is a great question. I have 2 points. One, in terms of convincing, I know I saw a lot of questions that talked or used the word convincing different entities. The first thing that comes to mind is this new safe and inclusive work environment plan that the NSF has added as a requirement to many of their solicitations. And so, I mean, they're a very well-known entity, and hopefully this will sort of cause a domino effect where other organizations and institutions are beginning to implement this work if they haven't done so already. I mean, another fear with this is that it just becomes a checklist and it's performative. But I mean, step one. And just for a personal experience, for Field Futures, I know, I mean, Hubbard Brook didn't really know anything of it. I know that LTER did, and they were very involved. So when I took the training, I sort of used like my personal experience, and I wrote a bunch of notes down. I wrote about how this could be, I sort of pitched it about how my experience with field work in my past and with the experience through the workshop helped me become like a more holistic field worker because of XYZ. And so them seeing sort of this evidence that I personally went through and me bringing it back to the community was sort of a way in to convincing them, because it's not just me being like, oh, this is something that I heard of, I think it could be good. It was something that I personally went through. And so I think that's another way that that could make other people in power listen.
I think one thing to remember is that I feel like a lot of times when we do this work, we're put in a position of having to prove why. Like you said, having people listen, and the burden of evidence always kind of lands on us, versus holding others accountable for what they're responsible to. And they are responsible for all forms of safety. And I think that that's kind of an in a way, not just there's lots of resources. I pasted a link to the resources that Field Inclusive has, but when you have the resources available, you don't want to just say you should do a training without pointing, and this is the type of training that we should do. But I think is reminding folks that physical field safety and social field safety are all part of the responsibility of the department. And I think that's a hard conversation sometimes, because you're trying to prove that it's not a checkbox, that this is, but I think presenting it, a lot of people are just unaware that that's part of what you should already be doing, because a lot of departments are used to doing physical field safety. You're not supposed to endanger anybody. And so I think by saying part of not endangering anybody, it's this whole new realm that, that's not being currently considered. There's all these other things that threaten you, psychologically or physically, which are not being, part of our current policy, something like that. But I would always approach it not with the burden of evidence, but more of this: we're not fulfilling our responsibility, and we need to take advantage of this resource, or we should make sure that we do this training in order to really fulfill our duty and our accountability and what we're responsible for.
That's a really, really helpful framing, that field inclusivity can start with like the language we're already using about the expectations we're setting, like should include already a lot of these considerations. So a lot of our panelists are sharing resource links in the chat. We will compile those and send them out with the recording of this webinar as well. And I also just wanted to make a plug, since we're all AOS members here. Field Inclusive is going to be facilitating I think a symposium in person at the AOS meeting in Colorado in October. So we hope that this can kind of be for all of us AOS members that are here in this moment virtually, to get excited about participating in that in person, to keep staying part of this conversation in the ornithology community specifically. Jerika, if you wanted to speak to that before we move on to the next question, I see your hand up.
Oh, yeah, so sorry. I was just very charged with all the wonderful comments ahead of me, and just reminding folks, as far as convincing, like, this is absolutely a potentially life or death threatening concern. We've had people go out into the field and have lose. It's a very serious issue. I think the idea of letting that be very clear and at the forefront, that this is it's almost too important not to, it's like, so it's the most important thing, our wellness. And also this reminding organizations as well about this signaling change in our culture, that we don't want to be on the wrong side of history when we look back and see how, and we see that historically when we look at organizations and research hubs, and really motivating to join into this new movement where we're highlighting survivors. We're talking about stories that weren't talked about before. We're not keeping any secrets anymore. and inviting them to be part of it, as opposed to that sort of damage control approach that's very harmful. And I know that organizations don't want to take that either. They just sort of do it out of sort of a kind of a fear-based knee-jerk reaction. So yeah, thank you for letting me just chime that in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this actually is maybe a good moment to pivot, because we had some other questions too about, well, what if you're not the one in charge, so to speak, or you're not leading the fieldwork, but you're part of the field team? And obviously the long-term goal is that we're being thoughtful and we're preempting these potential challenges by, like Viviana said, making this part of our responsibility and making sure that we're designing our fieldwork plans in anticipation of all of these potential challenges. But the reality is we might often find ourselves in situations in the moment that we need some tools and strategies to deal with. And Natasza, you're one of our panelists we haven't gotten to hear from yet, and you've worked such a wide variety of field jobs in so many different settings. I didn't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to share on that question of like tools you found effective for, you know, when you're part of a field team, kind of tools for advocating or opening channels of conversation, or any other tools that you have found useful that you might want to speak to from the perspective of not the organizational or institutional level of how we implement this, but what about in the moment in the field as part of a team?
Yeah, so in my experience, so far, I've find doing a check-in with yourself, and check in with yourself in a sense of, you know, asking, you know, how can I step up to whatever the situation is? How can I open up and think about how you're going to convey whatever issue it may and may not be, first. So this way, when you do present it to someone, it's presented in a way where hopefully they'll be receptive to see that maybe a change needs to happen, or what happened shouldn't be happening, and so forth. So I think that, in my experience, what's helped me is just kind of checking in with myself first and asking myself, how can I best present this in order to get the most effective, most, you know, the soonest response, the fastest response to resolve what may be happening in the immediate. And I guess it's more of thinking tactfully. And if that doesn't necessarily work, then, you know, just going straight to whoever is on, maybe supervising that person who is your supervisor, and going straight to them and bringing to their attention that something may be happening that is not, should not be happening at all. So yeah, I think right now the way I've handled it so far with different situations I've been in is checking in with myself, thinking about how can I best present this to get the what's the outcome that I want when I say what's going on and what should be happening, and bringing that attention. And if it gets dismissed, not being scared to just jump over a few people to the higher person and bring it to their attention. And I think, you know, having, because a lot of times we mentioned earlier that sometimes we feel fearful to say something because it's like, oh, well, you're not doing your job, or, you know, whatever it may be, or look past it because we need the data. But if you want good data and you want, you know, we have to get past this personal part and we have to move forward from it. So yeah, I would say also just not be fearful to skip a few people in the hierarchy and bring it to their attention that this, whatever is happening is happening.
Yeah, thanks, Viviana, if you want to speak to that too.
I know that what we promote as an organization is also kind of being proactive. So there's some solutions that you can do even if you're not in charge. And just a few that I think are really useful are, if you're on the field or you know that somebody might be a risk, just have a list of emergency contact for people that you carry yourself or that you give to that person. You can really be proactive in creating kind of that environment for them. You can also create a safety plan independent of your supervisor, independent of who's leading the field crew, that you come up with proactively with that person, either for you or to kind of give out or communicate with the team. I know what has worked for some of the members of Field Inclusive that I even used when I was doing field work myself in Costa Rica a long time ago. I used to wear like university t-shirts because nobody gave us a magnet to identify ourselves, but I used to just kind of wear university t-shirts and try to be, if the department won't give you a magnet for your car, get a hat and get a t-shirt and buy that for other people if you can. But, you know, just trying to be proactive and not waiting for others to think of some of those solutions that ideally by going to these trainings or some of these webinars, you can say like, oh yeah, that's something that I hadn't thought of that doesn't require money, that just requires a little bit of time and planning. So those are just kind of some of the things that you can do ahead of time.
Thank you. Yeah, Jerika, go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of plug, and all of these are so are all wonderful. I'm learning a lot just from these my co-panelists' comments. And just wanted to plug the importance of third-party entities that aren't invested in this, don't work at the same organization, don't have any vested sort of power over if they will be in trouble if they take a side or something like that, because it's very uncomfortable sometimes to be the one who speaks up or to say something. And so that's even, you know, why many orgs exist, just to serve that. If you want something to be said, but you don't want to be the one to say it, a third party organization can be contacted to say, hey, we're a little concerned over some things we witnessed or some things we are worried about, something that can help absorb that very uncomfortable role that the bystander sometimes has to play, to be the one to say something and feel safe that their job security or that their the capital of their likability within the organization, things like that aren't going to be compromised. And so I'd say third parties are very useful in that, because they don't have any kind of dogs in the fight in that sense, for lack of a better term, or a conflict of internal interest in that sense. So that's always useful.
Thanks. I wonder if just kind of following up on what Viviana was sharing about like these really tangible, oh, and Dayna, yeah, you should speak to this too, but I'll just pitch this idea for continuing this conversation. It's like, you know, Dayna was mentioning that this is kind of like starting to become the standard expectation from some big funders like NSF, for example. And if we're not funded by a big funder like that, like what would you say are the key pieces that, you know, we try not to make simply a checkbox to check, but like that kind of parallel that brainstorming Viviana was doing of like tangible things that we could try to put in place on our own teams. Like what have all of you found to be the most effective that we could all kind of compile that list together to add to the t-shirts and the magnets and the reflective vests and the, you know, collaborating with local partners who might be able to speak up too. And so yeah, go ahead, Dayna, if you want to chime in.
Right. No, I just wanted to sort of touch on everything that's been said, because I know, for example, we talked about like the third party. And so, I mean, that's the main reason why we are now implementing this like external conflict resolution mediation. And we're in the process of adding like an ombudsperson. So sort of like this public advocate who is well known in the Hubbard Brook community, who tries to resolve conflict. And so this is intended to sort of make these difficult conversations easier and also protect like the person who may not want to be out, and I mean, for multiple reasons. It might feel like it might impact their work, or they just don't feel like they're in the position, or because of power dynamics. So we're adding this ombudsperson. But then also we have like an anonymous like complaint form where anyone has access to this link and can submit information at any time. And so this is consistently checked for the protection of whoever wants to voice this concern. We also have like a widely shared emergency contact, or a widely shared Hubbard Brook Cooperators Workplace Safety Contact List, which is basically this like hierarchy of who we should contact. So like, let's say you try to reach out to somebody above you and it's not working out, then you have a list of the chain of command of the next person you could reach out to. And so this is available to everyone. And I think that's really important, because I remember as an undergrad, it could be really scary to bring these issues to somebody who is above you because of these power dynamics. And that's already a difficulty in itself, but having sort of this list available makes it more known, like this is available for you to use, and it's okay if you need to use it. But I just wanted to show these examples that we're using and that we're implementing based on what's been said recently.
Yeah, no, that's great to know that that like can exist on that institutional level, like a shared list, and then also on the level that Viviana was speaking to of like, you know, you and your coworkers in the field, or you and your supervisor can make that plan for, you know, local contacts as emergency contacts, or your own personal emergency contacts you want people to know about. So yeah, Jerika, if you want to say another thing to this point before we transition, that'd be great.
Yeah, sorry, I get this is such a so much important potential. I feel like we could talk about this topic for hours because there's so much to say. And the suggestions, I think, are even just being like we're starting to be very much more plural in what we think like this looks like. So even where we're giving people language of how to say things, when you're in a situation and your advice is making you so uncomfortable, it's like you're just like you would kind of freeze. We don't know what to do or how to, and actually giving people language, like sentences they can put in their back pocket, like that's not a comment that I welcome, thank you. Or for example, what's your goal in asking me that? When someone asks us something, like having, if we don't have that language, it's very difficult to do it on our own. And also even just small things, like for example, all of us should consider ourselves mandated reporters. I know that it seems like you have to go down to the court and get some sort of like government, approval, or have to take some tests or background check. All a mandated reporter is that I don't keep secrets. When I see something, I say something. So maybe, for example, somebody is starting to tell me something that is a little inappropriate. Oh, whoops, before you finish that story, I'd love for you to just know I'm a mandated reporter. I'd hate for you to not know that. And, of course, in the other person's mind, they imagine everything they say is going to go directly to their boss, if they're bullying someone or if their behavior is not appropriate. So just even having language that we give people to help them navigate these very uncomfortable, very difficult things is very useful. We don't always know in the moment how to respond. And that's why the survivor, the victim of whatever the behavior is, takes it on, because it's like, oh, I didn't know what to do. And so when we actually provide those type of tools, it can be very helpful for people.
Yeah, I'm reflecting back on Natasha's comment about like checking in with ourselves. And if part of that self-check-in of like, do we feel safe, or how do I want to approach this strategically if I'm finding myself in a really uncomfortable or challenging situation, like being able to turn to a list of ideas of ways I could phrase things that I can imagine being really empowering or grounding and just helpful to strategize. So thank you for sharing that. So we have a lot more questions that folks pre-submitted, and so if we need to, we'll keep turning to that list, but I wanted to open it up for live questions from folks that are in the audience now. So if anyone wants to raise their hand or just unmute and ask a question of a particular panelist or of all the panelists, we would love to include you in this conversation and hear your questions. Yeah, Rose, please.
Hi, thank you guys so much for putting this on. This is a very important topic that I feel like I have not seen as much discussion of as there should be. I wanted to ask about urban fieldwork because that was my last position, had a lot of urban fieldwork, and I tried to do some research into like fieldwork safety, and I didn't see a lot of stuff about urban fieldwork, so I was wondering if anybody had any experience with that and like any suggestions or resources that I could look into for that.
Many of our panelists might have this experience, but I know that Natasza, you do have experience doing urban fieldwork as well as remote fieldwork. So I don't know if you want to take the first stab at this question.
Sure, I'm happy to. I would say that when you're doing urban fieldwork, a lot of people have this misconception like, oh, you're doing urban fieldwork, it should be safe. There are a lot of people around and, it should be, and so you should go down the dark alley to get the data. And it's like, no, just be firm with just saying no and understanding and letting, your advisor, understand that, yes, this is urban fieldwork and I have access to a bus or a train or whatever it may be, but there are still certain areas that, may not be may not be safe for you. And, you know, just as I mentioned earlier, just being able to say, you know, being able to say, no, I don't feel comfortable doing this, even though we're in an urban area. And sure, I can call for help, the police, they're, you know, in an urban area that's sometimes accessible for the most part. But still, you should still be able to say no. And if you don't feel comfortable going to a certain area, then you shouldn't have to. I don't know if that answered your question fully.
I wonder do you have any thoughts, just because you've worked in urban and super remote areas of different kinds, like whether some of the like really kind of low-hanging fruit, tangible tools of like self-identification as a researcher, or like, are those things different in an urban and a remote context?
I would say trust your intuition in urban and remote, because you're going to be able, you will know for the most part that, you know, hey, this is not safe for me. And there are different things you have to be concerned about, whether it's, you know, if you're in the urban area and let's say you unfortunately fall and you sprain your ankle, you know, help can be very quick there versus when you're, you know, going remotely and you sprain your ankle remotely, you might be waiting for a day or two, possibly for help. So there are different things that I would say are more of a concern than others. And yeah, yeah, I would say just really trusting your gut and knowing that even in an urban area, um, you know, many things can happen as well. Um, and to be sure to say no when it's time to say no and you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We've had some good other questions popping into the chat, and one was upvoted, a question by Liza. So I'm just going to read that and it can be open to any panelist. What do you say to situations when you've witnessed inappropriate behavior, but the targeted colleagues have asked you not to say anything? Do any of the panelists have advice on how to proceed in supporting that person and pushing for needed change, I think on the bigger level, without violating that individual's privacy? If anyone has thoughts, any panelists is
Sorry, I
welcome
was just
to.
typing in the chat as the answer, but that is a very difficult. I just do feel that it's so hard when the burden is on an individual to signal a larger change when they're not ready. So we always want to make sure that victims and survivors have the full ownership over their story and when they're ready to tell it. And maybe even using proxy cases, or again, reaching out to organizations where the person can be still anonymous and the organization reaches out on behalf. But what I would say in this case is documenting, because survivors or victims of this type of behaviors sometimes don't want to in the moment because it feels so scary, especially when it's just happened. They still have all that adrenaline, all those sort of trauma in the brain. It's like, you know, the brain is like lit up like the 4th of July when something just happened that is so threatening to people. And by the way, trauma is any form of chronically feeling unsafe. Nothing had to have happened. Even if people are worrying every day, if something does happen, it can be very traumatic. But I would say documenting it is very, very good and important for later. What we often see is that 2 years later, a victim or a survivor comes forward and says, this happened. And everyone says, well, it was 2 years ago. Who, you know, how do you, where's your proof, or who, you know, and by that time, a lot of people have sort of, it's a vague memory to others who weren't victimized. So as a really wonderful support, saying, hey, I've documented everything. If you ever choose to hit that go button, I am the one who can help you. I can support it. But still letting them have the timeline in mind, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice. I want to make sure to ask this other question that just came into the chat, and we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe just as a way to kind of synthesize everyone's perspectives on this. The question from Mickey is, for those of us who are supervising others in the field, but don't have the funding or the infrastructure to create something as sophisticated as what Hubbard Brook has, what can we do to ensure that our field assistants and employees feel safe and feel they have recourse to raise their concerns, especially if it is just you and your assistant living at the field site? So we've touched on this a little bit in terms of like what are tools that don't cost any money that even on our small crews we can implement? We've touched on this in terms of like, if you have a little bit of administrative support, what would the top priorities be? But maybe this question can also, if folks have ideas, tap into like cultivating a trusting relationship in those small field crews. If you are the supervisor, if anyone wants to speak to priorities and strategies for that relationship in the field. And Natasza, yeah.
So I've worked with quite a bit of small crews, and I would say that one of the best things that someone did for me was let me know that we were out gonna to do a survey, and my supervisor at the time, this person let me know that the landowner was probably not the friendliest, had a history of not saying the best things, and was really just that on that level. And the best thing that this person, I would say, did for me was to inform me ahead of time. As you know, the responsibility of I'm giving you the option. I can't control this person. This person has a history of this, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. You know, we work as a team. I'm on your side, so I'm giving you the information ahead of time so we can make a decision as far as should I go do that survey, or we could change my schedule and I can do a different survey. And as a team lead, that was the best thing that she could have done for me at that time, was being honest, being open. And, you know, we can't control sometimes what other people say or do, but as a supervisor, this person was able to be honest and change the situation for me, where my outcome probably came out way better than me if it was a situation where my supervisor at the time was like, oh, it'll be fine, you know, when it's not fine. And so as a crew lead, I think that one of the best things you can do is have the most open conversations, even though they are difficult sometimes, with your team, a small team, because it facilitates it, it creates this trust. You know, from that point on, if I ever worked with this person again, I know that this person's got my back. I won't even think twice about it, you know, because it was a difficult conversation. And but this person was open about it and gave me that option. And I think that's one of the best things that you can do when it comes down to supporting a team and letting them know that, you know, I'm here for you. We are a team. This is difficult, but I'm standing up for you in this way.
Yeah, that's really huge. I don't know if any other panelists, Jerika, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I feel like that there's just so much energy about all of this. I get excited about these things because they're so, I see these questions and these issues as really signaling that change of culture. And we do it sometimes even just with how we casually, how we speak. Just saying, if I had somebody in my field site when I was enduring a very difficult you know, doctoral research, if my advisor spoke with a tone and was like, oh, and if you don't feel that that works, that's okay. Or, oh, if you're not up for that, totally no worries, let's talk about it, or let's figure out something together. The feeling and the tone I got was like, this is absolutely, anything that person says has to be done to a T. There's no renegotiating it. Just that those senses we get from those power dynamics. So even just speaking at a like I think like was previously stated by fellow panelists, that just saying, hey, are you okay with that? Or, you know, just changing the way we talk can be really, really empower, make a big effort to letting students know that you're on their side as well. And free resources. We have a lot of them. I can send you I can send you our training for free, a video recording of it. There are many, we're sort of blossoming up right now, Me Too organizations and anti-violence organizations, and pushing back. And so I would say we really need each other. I think that's the most valuable resource, is reaching out as communities and crowdsourcing all of the things that exist. And the burden shouldn't be on you, advisor. You know, we're a whole community of scientists and we're a whole community of survivors, and also centering survivors as people who are also not just victims, but can make suggestions, can show us how things should be implemented. But I'll quiet myself just because I've said a lot.
No, we so appreciate all of your wisdom, and you kind of just, I can't believe we only have 3 minutes left, but I think Jerika just set a good tone for the note we want to end on. So I want to invite the other three panelists, if you have a similar kind of closing thought of like, what's the one thing that's making you most hopeful or excited in this space right now, or what's the one thing that you would encourage folks to look into next? And we'll also compile all the resources that folks have shared in the chat and share it with the recording. So if panelists, if you have other resources you'd like to send to the organizing committee, we'll make sure that those get included in that. But yeah, if the other three panelists have a similar kind of closing thought of how to empower all of us to keep doing this work in our own field spaces, we'd love to hear from you to kind of wrap up our chat.
Yes, really quickly. So I've just been really inspired by, I don't know, like the amount of increase in like speaking out in different fields, but also in STEM. Like people are coming out and they're speaking out about all of these really, really important issues that were pushed under the rug for years. And I know, like, I had field experiences as a student where something happened that was pretty serious, and then I had a colleague who was maybe had a higher position than me say something like, oh, maybe we just shouldn't say anything because it's easier. And so having someone in that power say something like that really can impact not just the way that you react, but the way, like, your position or your desire to continue in that field. And so I think it's really important to remember that just because with a different form of power, different sets, something doesn't necessarily mean that that's the field feeling, whatever, if you're checking in feeling, or there's, I would say your gut is saying, and remember that your voice does matter, even if it sometimes feel like it doesn't.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Natasza and Viviana, if you have a closing thought, we'd love to hear from you too.
I just want to say that this is just, to me, a first step. Like at the AOS conference, there will be a panel discussion that Field Inclusive will be a part of, in addition to that workshop. And I did paste a link with a lot of resources. And again, somebody mentioned the great article that Amelia and others put together that really has kind of more specific steps that do summarize some of the things that we've said. And a lot of them, what I like about that article and a lot of the resources that I think many of us shared is that you can be proactive rather than reactive. You know, ideally, you don't want to wait until you have to react. You really want to prepare yourself and know what your rights are. You know, providing a safe environment is usually required by every university, and that goes all the way down to the field. And so I think is making folks aware of what their responsibilities are, and making folks aware of the risks that they don't perceive because they're not influenced by them, but you are. And just trying to be an advocate for yourself or being an advocate for others, and doing by example. It's kind of what I'd recommend. But thank you for putting this on, and thank you for you guys to listen.
Thanks, Viviana. Natasza.
Yeah, I would say that, well, thank you for putting this on first. This is fantastic. And I think that just creating this domino effect where, we're all starting to speak out, everyone is, we're getting tools together and action plans and speaking out and supporting each other, and trusting your gut. I think that it's really exciting to be a part of this movement as far as making it happen and just making field work more enjoyable. And I think speaking up to your department, getting your department on board, even if you're the sole person that's leading, get up and do it. You can do it in small steps. It doesn't have to be a big step at first. It can be as simple as an email to an advisor that you trust, and it may not always be your immediate advisor. So sometimes speaking out in these little steps, you know, can start paving the way. Yeah, and trusting your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And say something about it. So yeah.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists and to all of you for submitting questions ahead of time and participating in the discussion now. This feels far too short, but I hope it feels like a starting point, especially for those of us that will be at the AOS meeting in October, to take that next step within our ornithology community, specifically to keep having these discussions. So we will provide, I think all the panelists have offered to be willing to receive questions or be in touch. So we'll provide that contact info as well as all the resources that they shared when the recording of this webinar is ready. So you can share it with others on your teams as well. So just want to thank all 4 of our panelists again. And thanks all of you for participating. And yeah, stay tuned for more professional development content for AOS students. We're grateful to all for helping us keep this webinar series going by showing your enthusiasm for all this content. So thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.